In today's episode, fantasy and non-fiction writing team Autumn Birt and Jesper Schmidt discuss their unique journeys and why they decided to team up for the long haul. Hello, and welcome to the Fearless Storyteller podcast. I'm your host, Ethan Freckleton. Have you ever noticed how fear stops us from creating and sharing our best work? Join the Fearless Storyteller as we explore the heart and soul of writing stories, songs, and scripts that sell with the people who write them. Each guest has their own unique hero's journey and insights into the intersections between limiting beliefs and success. Autumn Birt and Jesper Schmidt, welcome to the Fearless Storyteller podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. And so I get the sense that you're both authors of, maybe some fiction and nonfiction, and that you have a lot of overlap in your interests. And I believe you have a podcast together, but maybe each of you could do a little more justice and let the listeners know about you, what you'd like to share.
Okay, do you want to start, Autumn?
Sure, make me go first. That's normal. No. So yes, I'm an author. I did my debut novel, which is epic fantasy, Born of Water, in 2012, back in the Wild West days of indie publishing. And since then, I've released, I guess I'm on my fourth or fifth series that I'm working on, over 20 books. And I have some that are co-written with my husband and some that are co-written with Jesper. So I've been doing this for quite a while. Jesper and I teamed up, what was it? 3.5 years ago, I think now?
Yeah, something like that.
It's getting there. And so we are now writing fantasy, and we help authors with writing, publishing, marketing. We do a podcast, a blog, courses, all those fun things. Plus we get to talk to each other at least once a week, so it's always good.
Cool. Awesome. And so it's Jesper. Did I hear that?
Yeah. So I'm then across the pond. So I'm in Denmark, I also I think it was around 2015, if memory serves me right, that I started writing. And I also write fantasy, of course. I don't know. I think between fiction titles, some of them written together with Autumn, a few of them on my own, and then a fantasy trilogy. I don't know, I'm probably around 10 books or something like that. So between the two of us, we have quite a lot of books written.
Yeah, they just kind of magically add up over time.
Yeah, they do.
You start out, I don't know about you, start out and you hear about people writing 40 books, 50 books, 100 books. It's like, I haven't written one book. Like, how is that even possible?
Yeah.
But clearly, you figured it out along the way. And I'm curious what drew each of you into writing in the first place.
Oof. You go ahead on this one. I'll let you go first.
Yeah, okay, because I probably have the bit more, untraditionally way of answering that question, I guess, because a lot of the time, at least, I listen to a lot of podcasts myself, and a lot of the time when authors are asked that question, they usually answer something like, I've always wanted to write, I've written since I was 10 years old, or something like that. But that was really not the case for me. I've always liked storytelling. I've always liked the fantasy genre because of the world building. But I sort of had an idea somewhere in the back of my mind that one day, once I retired, then maybe I would write something. And then I just sort of let it be there and just thought, well, that's something I could get to one day. And then every summer the family and myself, we go to Finland in a summer cottage. And when you go there, usually you go to the sauna a lot. So, and I was sitting there in the sauna one evening, and then I don't know why I started thinking about it, but I started questioning sort of my own decision making and started asking myself, why is it that I haven't gotten into my head that I should write when I retire? Why couldn't I just start writing? And then, of course, it might take me long because I have a day job and all kinds of other things to do, but why couldn't I just sort of chip away at it and start now? And then the next morning, I got the laptop out and I started writing the most awful stuff that I have ever written. But I started, and I didn't stop since.
And for me, well, I actually always wanted to be an artist, so not an author. And for me, I always wrote. I loved stories and loved reading. And I did write short stories on the side, but I was really focused on drawing and painting. And it really took, I was working on my master's degree, and my husband happened to find, I often, when I got bored in class, I'd flip to the back of my notebook and start writing there, going from back to front, short stories and just ideas and things. And he found one of my notebooks and said, "You wrote this? This is good." And so it was his encouragement that got me taking writing more seriously than artwork. And I just fell in love with, I always like stories or paintings that hold a picture. And then when you realize that what you love telling is, these paintings that say, tell a story. And when you realize that writing tells a story a lot better and is a lot more fun, that I really got hooked and went on the path to taking some adult ed classes on writing, creative writing, and novel publishing, which led to eventually learning how to do indie publishing.
Yeah. And so wait a minute. So you were, bored in class, and are you talking about like high school, college?
College, master's degree.
How? Wait. All right. So you're in college, master's degree. Either paying out of pocket or having student loans or whatever.
Yeah.
A few tens of thousands.
Yes, United States, yay.
You were able to write short stories in your notebooks during class.
I have the brain of a squirrel, and I need to focus on things. Even I can admit this now because I no longer have the day job that I would be at.
Confessions.
Confessions. This is true confessions podcast. Yeah. That I would be at all employee meetings, or I ended up in my job. I was supervising employees. So when they call the supervisors together, and we'd have day-long training sessions, and you're supposed
those
to
kill the soul, don't they?
Oh, don't they? They're not so bad if you flip to the back of your notebook and start
This is how my first novel started. Was in a 2-day corporate training.
See, they're secretly incredibly inspiring in their own way.
Desperately needing escape. So I have to ask, did you graduate?
Yes. And it was even my undergraduate was studio in English, and my master's is ecology and environmental science. So don't even ask how I got a college to take me on with a completely different undergraduate. But yes,
that happens. Well, diverse experiences. That's great. And so there must have been something, Jesper, about the vacation in Finland. Was it just having space away from your day-to-day life and routine?
I think honestly that is just the case. The sort of de-stressing and stepping away from the day-to-day thing it happens almost every year. So every year before I leave for Finland, we usually go for 3 weeks. And every year I tell Autumn, okay, I'm not going to work. I'm not going to do anything. I will reply to your email if you want to ask me something, but otherwise I'm not going to do anything. And more or less every single year I end up sort of in the middle of the vacation, I will email her like a long notes for a plot for a new book or something. Just like, I don't know, it just comes to me every single time, even when I'm not trying. So it's
and that's interesting. It's like that period of rest like creates the conditions for our own
yes, I get to pick on him. Yes, I get to pick on him every single summer of, aren't you supposed to be spending time with your family? Stop working on this, but that's okay.
So Autumn, you mentioned like the day job is in the rearview mirror.
Yes.
So how are you able to be creative then if you're not bored at work or school, or like how does this work now?
I think, well, it's because, again, that I multitask. I'm not just one thing and not just one interest. So I like to write and edit in the morning. I like to draw in the afternoons. I do mentor and coach a lot of other authors. So you're always dancing around their times or looking up their needs or reading through their books. So it's multitasking, multi-breaks of a day. My husband will ask me, like, how can you be on the computer for like 12 hours a day? I'm like, well, I'm doing different things, though. To me, it's, and you go for a walk and you think about your own stories and things like that. So I am super passionate about what I do. And I also still have some environmental things that I work on and network with. So, and it shows up as a theme in some of my novels. So I think it's just those multifaceted interests, taking a break. Like my favorite current thing to stream is a Curiosity stream. And so I'm jumping from like dark matter to mushroom growing. And it's just, you get so many ideas from so many different places.
So it sounds like taking breaks, like even though you're working all the time, you're taking breaks from what you're working on. And maybe that's helping keep everything feel fresh. Yeah.
I get to change gears, even if it's all in the same vein.
Yeah. And so Jesper, gosh, you got to tell me how to say this correctly, by the way. No, you were so polite, you didn't correct me before I asked and hit record.
No, I think in part it's because I'm so used to it. Well, in Danish it is Jesper.
Yeah.
But most people don't know how to pronounce it, so I've just sort of gotten used to it, so I don't even correct people anymore.
Well, I'm going to self-censor myself. Well, so you're Danish, right? And you read a lot of fantasy. Did you growing up read a lot of like United Kingdoms and US centric fantasy, or is there also like a wealth of fantasy material like in your own country and culture?
Well, I mostly read basically the American authors, but the ones that were translated to Danish when I grew up, because when I grew up, of course, we didn't have the Kindle, we didn't have Amazon selling ebooks or anything like that. So what I read was what I could get at the library, and the library would usually hold, Danish translations of American titles in fantasy. So it'll be Lord of the Rings, Dragonlance, stuff like that. So the mainstream fantasy books.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I was just, wondering how like your own sensibilities, or interests could be shaped by, being, outside of the mainstream culture that that fantasy came from, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but and I think everybody brings sort of their own mindset, their own view of the world. Even if you're inside the U.S., I mean, living in one state to another state, you'll probably have quite a different view of things and the world, even at that. But of course, in my culture as a whole is also quite different. So obviously, even though I've read and I still do read mainly only, let's say, I think for the most part, American authors. I guess also because there is most of it is American authors in the fantasy genre, and also quite a lot of the Danish stuff I prefer not to read in the Danish because I write in English as well. I prefer to read in English rather than reading in Danish because I sort of, it screws up my author mind a bit.
So. That's a fair consideration. So why fantasy? Well, what is the draw of fantasy? And this question's for both of you. But
Yeah, well, for me, it is. I just always loved fantasy. I think it was really Dragonlance that initially pulled me in when I read that as a I don't know, I probably been like 12, 13 years old or something, when a friend of mine told me about Dragonlance and said, you should read this. And I started reading it, and I just loved it. And then I read more fantasy. And I have tried to read other things as well. And it's not that I dislike it, but there's just something about the whole other world, sort of alternative reality, the different fantasy races, magic, stuff like that. I don't know. It has always drawn me in. So, yeah, it's just always been my preference.
And I could say the same here. I mean, when I found fantasy, I was actually in junior high school in 7th grade. I mean, there was always, the kids' stories, but when I first found a short story on dragon impression, and that was it for me. It's like magic and dragons and a different world. And I do, since I love the natural world, I love the descriptions and the adventure of it. I travel a lot in my life because I love new places, and I love new landscapes and ecology, and you get that in the genre very strongly, along with adventure. And I'm still very much attracted to what's become noble bright, but as a few authors have pointed out, that it's really just like traditional fantasy where the heroes win. I love those types of stories where there's a positive despite all the darkness that comes through. And that we can take problems that happen in our world, and you can put them into a different place without all the tangles that come with the stuff, all the gunk that comes with our world, and maybe unknot them a little bit. I know my perspective, I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, sort of a Bible Belt area, very traditional. Even my parents, my mother was against women's lib for a long time. And I always wondered how they managed to hatch me for everything I've done and everything I go and do. And I really don't think I would have been quite the person I am if it hadn't been for fantasy stories to just give me this perspective of, you can be whatever you want. I never had that problem as a kid that, if the prince was out saving the day, I wanted to be the prince. I didn't care about the princess. So I could just put myself in their place and go on an adventure, and everything would work out, and I'd have great and amazing stories to tell and friends. It's like, sign me up. That is what I want to read. That's what I want to do.
yeah, that makes sense. That draw of being able to be whoever you want, and that sense of magic and something outside the ordinary, I suppose. Yeah. And so you both co-write, and
Yes.
And so what is the difference in experience? Like, I guess, a couple questions, and you can answer whatever part resonates, but like, one is why co-write, and then what's different about co-writing versus solo writing?
It's quite different, to be honest.
It is.
Well, I guess why do it? Well, I think there are several different things to it. One is that once we co-write, I usually it more or less doesn't matter what we're looking at, whether it's the world building, whether it's the character creation or the plot itself. The outcome always ends up being better than if I do it on my own, because the sort of the blind spot I have, Autumn can point them out, and hopefully vice versa, so that the end product just becomes better because we can challenge each other's mindset or our way of creating something, or if we miss a plot hole, the other one will catch it, and so on and so on. So for one, the end product is just better and stronger. And second, there is also sort of a business perspective in it, meaning that writing together is just twice as fast as doing it on your own. Because while I'm writing at the moment, for example, I'm writing draft one or the first draft of book number 2 in a new series, while Autumn is editing book number 1 in that series, right? So hopefully once she's done editing, I'll have the first draft of book 2 ready for her, and she could jump straight onto that one, and then I move on to book 3, right? So we can basically do everything twice as fast, which is quite a big draw if you also want to earn some money from your writing.
And I agree. It's definitely the sum of the parts. It's not 1 and 1 is equal 2. It's you come up with greater worlds, greater stories. Jesper tells stories in a way that I don't, a different structure, different emotions. I think it's also the dynamics of male, female. So we have different perspectives. And so adding that together, what we come up with is not something I'd write on my own. It's a different voice. It's not his voice. It's not my voice. It's a different type of story, something I wouldn't have written on my own. And so that's been really kind of neat. I mean, I have written quite a few books on my own and I enjoy it, but it's also really fun to network with someone else. And I mean, what author doesn't like talking passionately about what they're working on? And so to be able to do that with a co-collaborator, we can get lost, be like, oh shoot, we only had 2 hours this week and you have to go to sleep and you have work in the morning, and darn it, this is so much fun to be able to talk like this and talk about characters and not have someone think you're totally insane.
Yeah, there's a limit to how long our spouses wants to hear about some fantasy setting, but once we talk to each other, we can just keep on going for hours.
Oh, yeah.
That's funny. And I imagine it's not always easy. There may be skills you've each had to develop to maybe smooth out co-writing or collaboration with others.
I think we have been so amazingly fortunate in our teaming up where we almost always come to an agreement without even having to discuss it, but we come from different angles. And so like Jesper is amazingly good at marketing and spreadsheets, which make me want to run for the hills, where I'm really good at editing and graphic design and even book formatting and websites. So we tend to split the tasks very evenly. And even when it came to working on the books together, we plotted together, we developed the worlds together, we developed the characters together. But he usually takes the first draft, and I get it from that point and fill in the details, the plot holes, smooth things out, add in my bits, as well as then do the first major edit. So it just kind of, not everyone would probably just fall into it that easy, but it's been just about that easy since day one when we teamed up.
And you also mentioned co-writing with your husband as well. Yes,
that's a totally different story because I live with him. Jesper, I could be like, not working, and my husband's I don't think he'll listen to this podcast, and he's not here right now, so I can call him things that I would never say personally. But I always joke that he's my delicate orchid. So he's so sensitive. And for him, the first time we wrote together, I wrote first, and it took him 5 years, I think, to do his part. So the next time he's proposed a book that he wanted to write, I said, you write your part. I don't care if it's word vomit. Just get it down. I will fix it and I will add to it. And yeah, he gave me word vomit. But it was absolutely, it took me days of cutting and copying and trying to make a logical sense out of it. And it worked, though, and he still wants to do another book with me, and we've been married 20 years now, so I guess all is well. It's good.
Yeah, but one of the keys to making collaboration work, and I honestly think that collaboration is something we'll see more and more happening in the years to come. More and more authors teaming up and writing together. But I think one of the key aspects of making it work is really that you can't be too precious about your own stuff, for one. So you have to accept when the other one says, well, this is not working for me, then you can't make a fight out of it and insist that your stuff has to stay. You have to sort of find the middle ground somewhere. And if it's important to you, hopefully your collaborating partner will also respect that this is important, but still find that middle ground somewhere. So I think that's one thing. But the other thing is also just acknowledging where the other one is stronger than you. And just said, okay, I'll trust your guidance on this one and leave it with you, and you decide what to do here, right? And vice versa, of course. But you need to sort of understand your own skills and your own strengths and weaknesses, and then allow the other person to step in where you're not at the strongest, and just trust their guidance.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot about respecting the person you're working with. If you just think that you're right and they're wrong, it's not going to work out. And I mean, I have it so easy because Jesper hands me something and he literally is like, do what you want. And he trusts me to take whatever he's giving me, and that I might change things. And I promise to always let him know if it was anything big, so that if we're ever, famous and doing a talk show, I'm like, oh no, I took that out of there. So
Yeah.
It is good though, because we've been working with each other for 3 years before we started writing. We planned it and started working on it earlier, but now that we're really in the thick of it, we have a good friendship based.
Yeah.
And we've worked together, we're partners, and we can talk to each other very frankly and not get upset. And it's good. We've worked it all out.
Yeah. So you mentioned 3 years of kind of collaborating before you started writing. Is that what I heard?
Yes.
Yeah, and was that because you had your own books in progress or other projects, or just you did that much world building, or like?
Well, it sort of started with the Am Writing Fantasy brand, which is what hosts our podcast as well.
This was your nonfiction kind of
nonfiction, yes.
Okay.
And that's where we started, because we basically we wanted to offer courses to authors. So we had some courses that we developed together. And we started, for a while, we tried to run a YouTube channel. That was a bit of a nightmare. We transitioned it into a podcast later on. Yes. But all that nonfiction stuff, we also had a couple of books, for example, some guidebooks on how to plot a novel and so on we wanted to write. Mm-hmm. And all of that sort of platform building, getting the podcast running, getting this courses completed and made available for sale, and all of that stuff just took a couple of years. And before we knew it, we were like 2.5 years down the line, and I still was looking at getting back into some fiction writing, but I think for an entire year or a bit more, maybe, I didn't do any fiction writing because we just had too many things on our plate. And Autumn was writing her own stuff sort of on the side. And when things started clearing up in the horizon there, and I was looking ahead, I basically started thinking, why it doesn't make much sense to me to start writing my own stuff and Autumn writing her own stuff. So we had a conversation, because we were building a course on basically from A to Z on how to do fantasy world building. Mm-hmm. And as part of that course, we then decided to build a joint world, basically, so that it would host both our fiction. But then down the line there, I can't remember exactly how it went, but I think at some point I suggested to Autumn, why don't we just write the books together rather than both of us writing our own stories in this joint world, because then we, as we just talked about, we should be able to do it twice as fast, and hopefully the end product will be better. Mm-hmm. And then we agreed to do that, and then we started.
So that's quite an evolution, and you obviously developed some trust and common perspectives on the genre itself and creating, it sounds like, before you just jumped into writing books together.
It was definitely a journey. It did not happen out of the blue.
It's not why we even got in touch and started collaborating. We were literally starting with just website, blog, YouTube channel, just sort of like, hey, I'm working with authors, you're doing something similar, do you want to team up? And it's grown into an entire business and podcast and courses, and now nonfiction books, and now fantasy books.
So how did you meet or connect, like, in the first place to have that conversation? Was it?
He always makes me tell it, so I guess I will.
Yes, there was an audible silence there.
Yeah.
That was my silence waiting for Autumn to speak.
Yes. Well, I guess it is my fault, though. He looked me up. He found me first. We were both on Twitter, and I was doing some fantasy map making blog posts, and he had just come out with his fantasy map making book. And so I remember it is his fault. He tweeted to me first asking if I would take a look at it, maybe do a blog post on it. So I did that, and we stayed mildly in touch. And just recently, I think less than a year after we started talking and had met each other, I actually left my day job through quite a fun day. I actually put in my 2-week notice so that I left on my birthday.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, if you're going to go out, I guess go out in style. I brought my dog to the office, which was highly against rules, but I figured at that point, what are they going to do? And
if you're going to cross a bridge, burn it in dog hair first.
I think they'll still give me a good reference, so we'll have to see. I will never know. But yeah, so my husband and I, when we met, the one thing we wanted to do was travel. And it took us over 16 years to finally save up the money and just finally said, to heck with it, we're doing it. And so we started traveling. And things were going well. I just bought the Am Writing Fantasy URL, and I was creating that platform, and it was picking up really quickly, and I knew I needed help. And I was actually up at a Pukawaska National Park in Canada on a 10-mile hike thinking, I need help. I need a collaborator. Who do I know? And I thought of Jesper and sent him an email, and I got back to the campsite, kind of one of those shy, I always joke it's like a first date, blind date, kind of like, hey, I have this platform. I kind of know you. You have a YouTube channel. I'm not doing that. Ever thought about doing, a website and courses and blah, blah, blah. We could help each other. And yeah, he came back with sounds nice, but what if we did a business? And came up with a great business plan and ideas, and that's where we've just fit each other's niches really well.
That's great. And it doesn't really sound like a short game,
No, it's been a long game from the beginning.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the probably good things we did in the beginning, which I guess if somebody listening would think about finding somebody to team up with as well is a good idea, was that already way up front, we had a video meeting where I sort of just laid my cards on the table and saying, okay, Autumn, this is what I want to do, and this is my goal for things. And then, of course, Autumn shared hers, and we tried to see, do we even have an overlap on what we're trying to achieve long term? Because if we don't, then this whole thing would not make sense to start embarking on. But luckily enough, we wanted the same thing long term. Yeah. So then we had a good foundation to build on. But I think just that, it sounds simple, but just that sort of let's align on each other's goals and motivations up front is really, really helpful. And it can probably avoid some bad experiences down the line once, like 1.5 years later, you figure out that the other one is in it for something other than you.
That could be vulnerable, though, right? Like, and I think about, as I get older, it's easier to just start from a place of vulnerability and maybe maturity, and there's some life lessons along the way.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, it may be like, gosh, it's like dating, right? Like, I just really want to have a co-writer, or I want to have a collaborator in this business, and they're going to tell me no if I just come with all these stipulations up front, right?
Yeah, but it's more about sharing. Why is it that you want that, right? That could be because you feel like, I just want to write some stories and I'm not good at editing, so I want somebody who's good at that, for instance. But it could also be the more commercial side, like I want this to grow into a profitable business where I sell a lot of books. There's nothing wrong with either or. Both of those goals are absolutely fine, but they are very, very different. And if you coming into this collaboration with two different perspectives in mind, then those are going to collide some point down the line, when one wants to be autistic and write wonderful books and the other one wants to earn money. Then you've got a headbutt at some point then.
Yeah, or somebody, has another project that they'd really rather be doing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So Autumn, you have a lot of clients, it sounds like, or you've had a lot of experience, including maybe your husband as an informal client. Like,
Yeah, definitely. He's definitely I treat him very well as he's my number one client.
so like, what are the most common things that are coming up as obstacles for people, whether it's getting started or, whatever it is?
I think it's amazing how many authors pick up writing and don't understand developing like a plot, and even talking about how to talk about point of view and not head hop. Like, why is head hopping an issue if you're writing in third person? So there's a lot of those basic conversations, I have to admit, and I learned so much more sometimes by talking to novice authors. I just had my first author I worked with who wrote on first and present tense, and I'm like, this is a thing. I didn't realize this was a thing. And I got to read all about authors who write in present tense and which genres use it and why it works or why it doesn't. So it's fun because it's sort of like, listening to podcasts, but you get to answer real world questions and go look things up. But I definitely think if anyone's looking into writing, again, it's just amazing how many people just have an idea and they're passionate and they write, even if it's something small, like 5,000 to 10,000 words. And then they ask for a coach or look for someone editing and content editing. And I look at it and like, wow, where's your climax? Where's your inciting incident? How do you do dialogue? Why are you jumping into like 5 different characters' heads in like 3 paragraphs? We're going to talk about these things. I often wonder, I've met also a lot of authors who have started off on a book and a genre that they don't read in, and they don't know the big tropes. And I'm like, wow, that's brave.
Why do you
let's
think
back
that,
up.
Why do you think that is? Why start with writing?
I really don't know. I think it's
I have a
just
guess.
Maybe they have an interest.
What's your guess, Jesper?
Well, I think because what we see as well with the Am Writing Fantasy podcast and also the courses that we're selling, a lot of the time when somebody comes to us, it is often because they have burnt their hands on something already, meaning that I think a lot of people have a perception that telling a story, that's easy. I know how to write. I can write a story. And then they start. And they don't quite spend the time actually educating themselves about what does a good story contain and what makes a story work. Why do readers actually care about characters? What does it take to make them care? And of course the genre tropes and the different stuff that Autumn just mentioned. But I think people just believe initially that writing is easy, then they just jump into it, then they figure out, oh, okay, this is much harder than I thought.
Yeah.
And only then do they start going back and trying to figure out, okay, who can I contact, or what can I read, which podcast can I listen to educate myself?
Well, that's probably the exceptional case, though. I think most people give up and then go, well, maybe I'll try it when I retire. Like, there's this...
True, yeah. I mean, and of course, those are the only ones we see are the ones who did not give up. I'm sure that there's a ton more who just gave up, for sure.
Yeah.
Because, like, if you think about, like, all that stuff, like, that's not how a kid starts, right? Like, playing, right? And you're not like, hey, I've got to worry about all these commercial constraints and I've got to worry about it connecting with anybody other than myself, right?
Right.
There's that sense of play. So, like, how do you preserve that sense of play when you're so early in that process where everything could be potentially overwhelming? Like, there's so much to figure out before I can, like, sell a story.
And even to me, the perspective, keeping things realistic of how many stories will you sell for your first book. But to me, it is always focusing on remembering what it is. What is the passion? What brought you to writing? And I always remember I had a calculus teacher in college, and he loved calculus. I mean, just oozed calculus. And he would get me so excited, darn him. I actually got an A in calculus. And I have to admit, I like math.
Yeah.
But I was a studio art major and I got an A in calculus because he loved it. And I think when you work with people who do love it, who remember why you love it. I have such a strong memory of when I uploaded my first book to Amazon and the thrill of that first sale, and even just looking at it on my KDP dashboard, and it's like sitting there all by itself with all this empty space below it going, someday I will fill that, and doing it.
Yeah.
And yeah, just working with each new author, hearing their excitement makes me excited, which makes them excited. And it's just a positive feedback loop. So even when you sit down and say, hey, this needs work, also saying, you're doing so well. And this is so exciting. And I cannot wait to see this, that chill when it's actually up there on Amazon and you get your first review. And I cannot wait for those things.
Jesper, what was some of the most exciting early moments for you with writing?
I think I was very, very excited about that first story that didn't ever go anywhere. Because I don't know, I think it's just the whole thing about telling a story that I really like. And I think for me as well, I've had to teach myself, like many others also need to teach themselves or have already taught themselves, is to not get too dazzled and about new great ideas in the middle of something else, because I think unfortunately it happens to all of us. But the art of, or the skill of sticking to it until you reach the end, it's actually more important than most people think.
Yeah, structure I suppose makes that easier, but nothing like having a commitment to a co-writer, I imagine.
Yeah,
that
keep
helps you honest.
Too,
yeah. I always feel like I'm behind because the editing is always being still new to it was easier with the nonfiction because it's like, it's not hard to edit nonfiction, but this is much more in depth and adding in layers and other things. And I feel like I'm always so far behind where I want to be in my editing of book one, but I keep going, and Jesper hasn't yelled at me yet, so we're good.
What's the draw of editing?
I like honing things. I think I do it. Jesper thinks I'm crazy, which is fair enough. I like doing these multi-level passes where I usually do a quick read through and make a lot of notes of a content edit. And then I go back through and I fix the major things, and then I fix the minor things. And then I do edit with like a software like Pro Writing Aid. And then I'll send it off to the editor. And I just like seeing something go from, my original notes of, oh my gosh, what were you thinking? I'm so harsh to myself in my notes. I never want anyone else to read them. I will pull stuff apart and be like, no, and go fix this and add in these senses, and then to see the final one and be like, yeah, that is pretty. I'm impressed with that now. So I do like just seeing that refinement come out. I think it's the same as, since I am a visual artist as well, there's always a moment in a painting where you're thinking, this is crap, it looks like crap, and it's total leap of faith to keep going, saying, I'm going to make something of this. And I think editing is the exact same thing. There's a moment, it's a leap of faith saying, this is going somewhere and it will be fine, and getting it there is wonderful.
Yeah, that's probably a good analogy, actually, the painting, because if you're impatient and you just want it all to be there right away on the first go, it just doesn't work that way, right?
No. There's a few artists that, if you want to be Bob Ross, he could always whip out a masterpiece on one go. But not all of us are Bob Ross. Yeah.
Right. Yes, you ever heard of the Renaissance painter One Go?
Oh, no.
Me neither.
No.
So what are you working on now?
I'll let you describe our wonderful world of Elysium that we came up with.
Yeah, so we built a very comprehensive world on purpose, meaning that we made it very, very big with multiple different realms in it, so that it can host hopefully a multitude of stories if we continue writing in that setting for 20 years or whatever. Then there'll be enough space that we can keep telling stories in that setting. So we are currently working on the first trilogy in that setting. We have written and also released a first short story that people can get from amreadingfantasy.com. But then that's sort of a prelude to the actual trilogy that we're currently working on. So that's pretty exciting, and we already have ideas for the next trilogy after that. So that's sort of not getting tempted to jump ship and into that one instead. So yeah, we try to keep the nose in the trail here and getting the first trilogy finished as fast as we can.
Yes.
Yeah. How much world building do you need before you get going? Do you do like art or like other things? Like how do you what does it mean to be a comprehensive world building?
Well, actually, you in our case, it's a bit different because we, as I said a bit earlier, we built our world while we were doing A to Z course on how to build the world, basically. So we ended up building a million things because we needed to, as part of the course, show examples of how we did it. So that meant that we built a ton more than what we would have done if we didn't do it as part of a course. So it took probably 1.5 years or something like that.
Yeah,
but that was because
so.
we were both building and recording a course at the same time. So that made it take a very, very long time. But I think we could probably do it in a month time or something like that if we only focused on that, or maybe even a bit less. Yeah. We also have quite some artwork done for the World of Elysium, which is not something we necessarily needed either as such, but there was a few pieces of artwork we wanted to have created to use as part of the marketing and so on. And then we found a really good artist, and then we thought, well, let's do some more. So we ended up ordering probably 4 times as much as we initially intended.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
That's a nice luxury to have. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Definitely. But I think, comprehensive world, it's also partially because we are co-writing. So we needed to really know the specifics and the distances. And that way, if we both have different, if we had different views and he writes one thing and then I go in and I edit in other things, it wouldn't work out. So we need to have some very specific ideas and concrete worlds. When I write by myself, I will sometimes have a kind of a loose world and realize that I have to stop either writing or I have to go back when I edit and add in more details.
Yeah.
I tend to just jump into the frying pan constantly in my life. So Jesper makes sure that I test the waters first and we get in there, get it going well, so that I'm not constantly running forward and then circling back and wasting a lot of time.
Yeah. So how do you maintain? You have a world Bible or something? How do you make this work for you in a way that's accessible and you can find what you need? And
yeah, well, right now it's not too accessible, meaning that right now it actually sits in a Word document, which is a bit annoying. But the idea is that we want to
Control F works,
Yeah, well, but it's still a bit annoying to go through a Word document. But the idea is really we want to put it on the Am Reading Fantasy website, so that it basically becomes like a wiki, and you can click around on the website and so on. So that's the idea. But we haven't gotten that far yet, since we haven't actually released the first trilogy yet. But I would say within the next year or so, then amreadingfantasy.com will be fully populated with a nice wiki and nice artwork and all kinds of things. So,
and it kind of waits on me, since I'm also the web builder, so depends on where the priority of the project is. So that one's, I love website building, so I want to do that one, but really I need to finish editing this book, and then I have to finish editing the final book that I wrote by myself and was a series I've been releasing. So I have 2 books on my plate to edit right now.
Okay,
Maxed out.
you mentioned just the most fun word ever,
Oh no.
which was priority.
Yeah.
And so, like, how you've got all these things going on. That's the virtue of multitasking, Autumn. Like, how do you prioritize your work? Like, what are you thinking about when you
when I make my schedule? I try to be fair, and I give in writing fantasy or my writing. I make sure, especially, I think most authors have this problem, especially when you have a day job and family and hobbies, that you don't give yourself any time. So I've tried to be better at giving myself time, and it used to be my writing time, but now it's become, the I'm writing fantasy writing time, though. Like I said, I have to finish up my own book, so I make sure there's a little bit of time, usually the first thing in the morning, that happens, and I hit a goal. And then I do have some client work, coaching work, what I do, I've got to be responsible for my share of paying the mortgage and all of those things, so I have to make money. It doesn't go away. Even, the books, they only don't sell themselves anymore, unfortunately. So you got to always market and do things. Yeah. So I make sure that, that works. I have, just when I was writing, I would always set weekly writing goals that could adjust depending on my week. And I do the same thing now. I keep a register of things that are due, when they're due, what promises I've made to clients, what their timelines are. And try not to panic if things get, shoved around more than I expected or something big comes up. So there's always those days. I try not to work every day of the week or on the weekends, because sometimes my own stuff gets pushed to the weekends. And I have to remember that I like hiking and I like spending time with my husband and my dog. So I make sure I get out and do things like that too. I think if anyone, and Jesper has oddly read this book too, of course, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That is a fantastic book. And there's a whole section in there about setting scheduling time aside based on the roles you have in your life, like daughter, writer, author, wife, whatever you are, and making sure you put in time for all of those things. And so now I make sure I have a weekly phone call with my mom, and we do daily. Ever since COVID, we talk daily, through messaging apps now, which is kind of cute. We used to we'd go days without sending each other texts, and now it's just like, good morning, how are you? And we still haven't gotten out of the habit, so it's kind of sweet.
That's cool. It's a nice thing to carry over.
Yeah.
COVID. I've got a little pro tip, since I don't plan to go back to the day job either. Scheduling in self-time into the calendar, in the day job calendar, is great. You don't have to tell people, hey, I'm going to schedule in 2 hours of personal development or self-development time, right? And just do whatever the heck I need to do, right?
Yes. Or the other secret of always, if something you think will take an hour, write down an hour and a half, so you have a few moments in there where you don't feel rushed.
Or if you hate 4:00 meetings and you always go home in a bad mood and can't write anymore, just schedule stuff in at 4:00. People can't book you.
That's right. Always a pro tip. That is a good one.
Yes. Jesper, you seem to have a lot of irons in the fire as well. So how are you handling managing your time? What are you thinking about?
I probably have too many because I'm not very good, to be honest, at scheduling the sort of me time and so on. Very honest, I probably work too much, and I keep going for hours and hours and hours. But at least what I try in terms of prioritizing is that I try to do the most important thing first in the morning, and that's the writing part. So I always try to get in my writing first thing when I start the morning, because then the rest of the day I sort of have a clean conscience with myself, because I know I got the important stuff done. And also, at least for me, and I think it works like that for a lot of people, I have figured out as well that later in the day, when I don't have as much energy and I'm a bit tired, the sort of the business things, the marketing or advertising stuff, I can do that even with an eye closed. That's not a problem at all. But the writing, the creative stuff, I really have to be fresh in my mind in order to do that. So that's how it works for me.
Yeah,
but I work too much, to be honest. So yeah.
Well, what does that mean, I suppose, is the question. You don't have to answer that, but what does it mean to work too much? Like, I assume there's a trade-off where, perhaps a thought of an unmet need there.
Yeah, I don't know. I probably work like, 12 hours a day, probably.
You sound like an American, Jesper.
Yeah, and it's not common in my part of the world either. I mean,
it's all that fantasy you read growing up.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and then I also referee soccer. So in the weekend, I'm often out refereeing as well, which is of course a bit of me time in a sense, but it's also work at the same time. So so it happens sometimes, like Sunday afternoon, I'm just like, I'm not leaving this couch.
Mm-hmm. A little rest is good.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And so, where can listeners find you? Is a good question.
That's always easy. The best way to find us is just go to Am Writing Fantasy, or if you do want to check out our fiction, go to Am Reading Fantasy.
You have Am Writing and Am Reading. Look at that.
Yeah. Clever that way.
We're pretty crafty like that. Wow. But since this is a podcast, then of course the easiest thing is just to search for Am Writing Fantasy in your podcast app, and then you'll find us.
Yes.
That's true. Yes. So you have links to everything from, it looks like, from amwritingfantasy.com, including to your personal sites and everything.
Yes.
Yeah, you can find everything there, yes.
Great. That's always helpful.
Yeah.
We tried to think that through, but you never know.
Yeah. Well, hey, since fantasy and you're reading and writing, like, maybe a good final question for both of you is, what's like, is there some favorite thing you've read or watched in the last year that you're really excited to share about?
Well,
I can share. I've just watched. I just finished up actually watching American Gods on Amazon Prime, and I really, really like that series. I must admit. The only sad thing was that I figured out that it looks like there should have been more, and they sort of stopped the series because it doesn't really conclude at the end of the last season as such.
Did you read
more
the
seems
book?
Like no, I haven't. But I've started thinking that I should read the book now, because I really liked that series. It was very well done.
and I've watched recently the Yin Yang Masters. There's two movies, both produced.
One
by
of them
China.
is really bad.
Yeah, one of them.
I saw that it appeared to be two different movies with the same title, and like
Yes,
potentially meta, like it's actually yin and yang.
yes.
Yeah. Okay.
There's one that's like the Eternal something. That's the bad one. The one that's just Yin Yang Masters is incredibly well done for the CGI and for the plotting. That there's the climax, which I will not do any spoilers, but the climax where the hero he's in a spot that I'm like, darn, I don't see the way out. And the way it resolves itself, I'm like, that's perfect. It makes sense. I never saw that coming. And that's exactly what you want as an author. So if anyone wants
some legitimate surprise.
A legitimate surprise by someone who's written over 20 books and who's coaches other authors, I was like, I never saw that one. That was brilliant.
Oh, was it a first act solution if you go back and deconstruct it, or a different form, because the writing forms can be different in different parts of the world?
Yeah, I would see. I don't usually use the act structure. I use the 7 steps of story structure. So it's I will say that it's one of those ones when it happens, you realize there's been foreshadowing for it the whole time that you never saw. It was just, it made perfect logical sense, but you never realized it was going to work out that way.
Fantastic. Well, Autumn, Jesper, it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure being here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ethan.
I hope you've enjoyed today's episode of The Fearless Storyteller. As a reminder, any and all links can be found in the show notes. And if you're enjoying this podcast, will you please consider leaving a review? By doing so, you'll be helping new listeners discover the Fearless Storyteller podcast.